The delivery driver didn't know my son, but when he leaned in and whispered, "Are you Evan's father?" my chest tightened in a way I still can't explain. He looked over his shoulder first, like someone might be listening, then pressed a small package into my hands. "Whatever they told you," he said quietly, "it's a lie. Open this alone." 2 years earlier, my daughter-in-law had stood in my kitchen and told me my son was overseas, building his career, consulting. Big money, big future. I believed her. I repeated that story to friends, neighbors, even to myself when the house felt too quiet. But 30 seconds after opening that package, everything I thought I knew collapsed. My son hadn't been traveling at all. He hadn't been busy. He hadn't been unreachable. He had been erased. And the most terrifying part wasn't where he was. It was realizing the person who made him disappear was already sitting at my family table, smiling at me, calling me dad, and waiting for me to never ask the right questions. The lie I wanted to believe. The first lie didn't sound like a lie. It sounded successful. Evan's consulting overseas now. My daughter-in-law, Marissa, would say, smiling politely. Europe mostly. Sometimes Asia. You know how those firms are. People nodded. I nodded too. My son had always been ambitious, so the story fit. At 64, recently widowed, I didn't have the energy to interrogate happiness when it was handed to me neatly wrapped. I told my neighbors Evan was doing great. I told myself I was proud. But pride has a quiet cousin doubt, and it lives in the gaps. Evan stopped calling, then texting, then answering emails altogether. Every time I asked, Marissa had an explanation ready before I finished the sentence. Different time zones, secure contracts, no personal devices allowed, reasonable answers, too reasonable. At night, sitting alone in the house my wife and I built, I'd stare at Evan's childhood photos and feel something tug at me, a sense that I was repeating a mistake I'd made before. Back when my wife said, "Something about Marissa isn't right," I ignored that too, because believing the lie was easier than facing the alternative. And if I had asked harder questions then, maybe my son wouldn't have disappeared right under my nose. The package that shouldn't exist. The moment that man said my son's name, I knew my life had just split into before and after. It was a Saturday morning at the farmer's market, the same one I'd gone to every week since my wife was alive. Same stalls, same small talk, same illusion of safety. I was choosing apples when I felt someone standing too close behind me. "Mr. Carter?" I turned to see a man in his 30s, delivery uniform, eyes darting like he was afraid of being seen with me. "Yes," he swallowed. "Are you Evan Carter's father?" My stomach tightened. "I am." He didn't smile, didn't relax. Instead, he glanced around the crowded market and lowered his voice. "I wasn't supposed to find you like this," he said, "but I can't keep carrying this." He pressed a small brown package into my hands. "No logo, no return address. Whatever story they gave you," he whispered, "it's not true." I opened my mouth to ask, "Who is they?" But he cut me off. "Open it alone. Please. Don't let anyone else see it." Then he stepped back, not hurried, not panicked, but final, like a man who had just crossed a line he could never uncross. I stood there holding that package while the market noise rushed back in around me. Apples, laughter, music, normal life. And in my hands, something that didn't belong in it at all. What was inside the package? I didn't open the package right away. I drove home on autopilot, the brown paper sitting on the passenger seat like it was watching me. Every red light felt too long. Every passing car felt like it slowed down to look. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking hard enough that I had to sit in the truck for a full minute before I could breathe normally again. Inside the house, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I placed the package on the kitchen table, the same table where my son once carved his initials when he was 12 and thought I wouldn't notice. I tore the paper carefully, like I was afraid it might explode. Inside were 3 things: a folded letter, a small black USB drive, and a photograph. The photograph hit first. It was Evan. There was no mistaking him. Same eyes, same crooked nose, same scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike as a kid. But everything else was wrong. He was thinner, pâle, older in a way that had nothing to do with time. He was holding a newspaper. The date was clear. 3 months ago. My chest tightened so suddenly I thought I might pass out. Evan wasn't overseas. He hadn't even left the country. And whatever place that photo was taken in, with its bare concrete wall and harsh lighting, was not anywhere my son had ever chosen to be. I stared at that picture until my vision blurred. Then I reached for the letter with hands that no longer felt like mine. The man who should have stayed silent. The letter started with a sentence that made my stomach drop. My name is Caleb Morris. I shouldn't be writing this. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, like every word had been written while someone was listening for footsteps. Caleb explained he worked as a third-party delivery driver. Nothing special. Medical supplies, paperwork, packages that asked no questions, until one route kept repeating. A private care facility just outside Spokane. Always paid in cash. Always under the same name. My daughter-in-law's name. For over a year, he wrote, I've delivered sealed packages to that facility on her behalf. I never knew what was inside. I never asked. Then came the line that changed everything. 3 weeks ago I saw your son. I had to read it twice. He described catching a glimpse through a secured door while a staff member signed paperwork. Evan had been standing inside. Not restrained. Not unconscious. Just waiting. Not sick the way they said. Caleb wrote. More like someone told to stay quiet long enough that the world would forget him. My chest burned. Caleb said he'd been warned not to talk, that people had been discouraged before. But he couldn't unsee Evan's face. I have a family, the letter ended, but your son deserves at least one person who didn't look away. I lowered the paper slowly. That was when I understood something terrifying. This wasn't just a lie, Marissa told. It was a system that expected everyone, including me, to stay silent. And the worst part? Someone had already tried to make sure this letter never reached my hands. She had been inside my house. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the USB drive like it might bite me. It was small, ordinary, the kind of thing people leave in a drawer and forget about. But my hands knew better. I plugged it into my laptop. A single folder opened. Inside were video files, each labeled with a date. The first one started automatically. And suddenly, I was looking at my own kitchen. Not live. Recorded. The timestamp read Tuesday, 2:14 p.m. a day. I knew exactly where I had been. Book club at the library. On the screen, my back door opened. Marissa stepped inside. Not cautiously, not like a guest, like someone who belonged there. She didn't look around. Didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the filing cabinet in my late wife's study, opened it, and began photographing documents with her phone. Page after page. Deeds, statements. Old folders my wife had labeled in neat handwriting. 4 minutes later, she left. The next video played. Different day. Same routine. Another angle showed her in the basement, opening storage boxes I hadn't touched since my wife died. Her face wasn't nervous. It was focused. Clinical. This wasn't curiosity. This was a search. By the 5th video, my hands were numb. She had been inside my home, over and over again, while smiling at me, while dropping off the kids, while asking how I was holding up. I closed the laptop slowly. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Marissa wasn't just lying about my son. She was dismantling my life piece by piece. And she'd been doing it right under my nose. The paper that proved he was trapped. I opened the laptop again long after midnight. The house felt different now, like it had secrets of its own. There was one file left on the USB drive. Not a video. A PDF. Medical records. At first, the language blurred together. Clinical terms, codes, signatures. Then I saw my son's full name. Evan Michael Carter. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The document said Evan had suffered a severe neurological injury following an accident, that he was no longer capable of managing his affairs, that he required continuous supervision. And then the line that made my vision go dark. Legal guardian. Marissa Carter. Granted 3 days after his hospital admission. 3 days. I kept reading. Visitation restricted. All communication monitored. No unsupervised contact with family members deemed emotionally destabilizing. Family members like me. The admission date sat at the top of the page. 2 years. 7 months. 1 day ago. 1 day after Marissa told me Evan had boarded a plane for his first overseas assignment. I leaned back in my chair, breath shallow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't overprotection. This was imprisonment with paperwork. I thought of every time I'd defended her, every time I'd told myself I was overthinking. And for the first time since my wife died, I felt something burn hotter than grief. Resolve. If Marissa had turned my son into a ghost, Then I would become the one thing she hadn't planned for, a father who stopped believing the story. Smiling at the woman who stole my son, Marissa came over the next morning like nothing had changed. Same soft sweater, same calm voice, same practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She brought the kids with her. That was the cruelest part. They ran into my arms, laughing, talking over each other, unaware that their father was locked away less than 100 miles from us. Marissa stood in the doorway watching, studying. I suddenly understood why she liked bringing them along. They were shields. "How have you been holding up?" she asked gently, setting her purse down. "I know it's been hard since Evan's been away so much." "Away." The word almost broke me. "I manage," I said, forcing a small smile. "They help." She nodded, satisfied. While the kids played in the living room, she followed me into the kitchen. Casual, calculated. "I've been trying to help Evan sort through some financial things remotely," she said. "He mentioned you and your wife were always very organized." There it was, the real reason. "I was wondering," she continued, lightly, "if Rose might have kept copies of old property records, trusts, anything like that." I kept my eyes on the coffee pot so she wouldn't see what crossed my face. "I'm not sure," I said slowly. "I'd have to look." Relief flickered across her expression just for a second. "That would mean so much," she said. "No rush. Maybe I could come by later this week and help you go through things?" "Help me search my house again." "Of course," I said. After she left with the kids, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart hammering. I wasn't just lying to her now. I was walking a tightrope over something very dark, and one wrong move would put me right beside my son. The key my wife never threw away. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me sit up, listening. Every shadow in the hallway felt heavier than it should. Sometime near dawn, a memory surfaced. Soft at first, then sharp enough to make my chest tighten. A key. Years ago, after my wife passed, I'd found it tucked inside the back of her jewelry box. No note, just a small paper tag with neat handwriting. Riverside Community Bank, Box 314. At the time, grief had swallowed everything else. I told myself I'd deal with it later. Later had arrived. The bank smelled like old paper and polished wood. The clerk didn't rush me. She'd probably seen men like me before. Men walking into quiet rooms carrying too much. She slid the metal box across the table and left me alone. Inside were three things: a thick legal document, a stack of photocopied deeds, and an envelope addressed to me, written in my wife's hand. I opened the letter first. "Henry, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong." My throat closed. She wrote about Marissa, about the little things that didn't add up, the way she watched Evan not with love, but calculation. "I've created a trust," she wrote, "to protect Evan and the children. If anyone ever tries to control his life or our assets, this will stop them." I pressed the letter to my chest. Even gone, my wife had been standing guard. When the lawyer stopped talking like a friend, I didn't call just any lawyer. I called Thomas Reed, the same man who helped my wife set up our wills 20 years ago, the same man who never wasted words when something was serious. He read the trust first, slowly, carefully. Then he read the medical records. By the time he finished, the office felt colder. "This trust is solid," he said finally. "Your wife was very smart." Relief flickered, then died when he didn't smile. "But that's not the real problem," he continued. I leaned forward. "What is?" Thomas closed the folder and looked me straight in the eye. "What you're describing isn't a family dispute," he said. "It's guardianship exploitation." He explained it plainly: how adults are declared incompetent with cooperative doctors, how spouses gain control, how assets disappear while the victim is isolated for their own good. "And the worst part," he added quietly, "once the system accepts the story, it protects itself." I felt my throat tighten. "So what do we do?" Thomas hesitated. "That depends on how far you're willing to go," he said. "Because people who challenge this don't just lose cases." He told me about a journalist who asked the wrong questions. One article published, gone 2 days later. Hit-and-run accident. Unsolved. I stared at the floor. Thomas slid a business card across the desk. "Private investigator," he said. "Former federal. If anyone can get proof from inside that facility, it's him." I picked up the card. In that moment, I understood something clearly. Saving my son wouldn't just cost money. It would cost safety, and there was no turning back. The man who told me to assume I was being watched. The investigator showed up after sunset. No phone call first. No announcement. I only knew he was there because my porch light flickered twice the signal he'd told Thomas to pass along. His name was Mark Halvorsen. Former federal. Gray at the temples. Eyes that never stopped scanning the tree line behind my house. Before he even stepped inside, he said, "Before we talk, assume your house is already compromised." That sentence changed the way I breathed. Inside, I laid everything out. The package, the photo, the videos, the trust, the facility. Mark didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and crossed his arms. "This isn't just one bad spouse," he said. "This is a pipeline. Lawyers, doctors, facilities. Everyone gets paid. Can you get proof?" I asked. He nodded once. "But understand this, once I start asking questions, they'll know you exist." I swallowed. "Do it." He studied me for a long moment, then said quietly, "Good, because they already know." He pulled out his phone and showed me a message received 20 minutes earlier. "Stop digging." No sender. No explanation. Just a warning. Before Mark left, he turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "From this point on, the safest thing you can do is nothing." He paused. "And the bravest thing is everything else. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? City, state, or country? And honestly, if you were in my position at this moment, would you walk away or keep fighting?" The woman who couldn't sleep anymore. She came to my house before sunrise. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes. "My name is Lena Brooks," she said quietly. "I'm a nurse at the facility." She didn't sit down. "I can't testify," she said immediately. "I have a daughter." Then she slid a USB drive across the table. "Your son isn't impaired," she whispered. "He's been asking for you for months. They won't let him call." Her hands were shaking. "I made copies before I quit," she said. "I just couldn't sleep anymore." Then she stood up, like staying any longer might break her. Seeing my son awake changed everything. The video call was scheduled for 6 minutes. That's all they allowed. 6 minutes to prove my son still existed. The screen flickered, then stabilized. And there he was, Evan, thinner than I remembered. His shoulders sloped forward like he'd learned not to take up space. But his eyes, God, his eyes were clear. "Dad," he said, not slurred, not confused, just tired. I couldn't speak at first. I was afraid if I did, I'd lose the sound of his voice. He asked about the kids, about the old dog we buried behind the shed, about whether the apple tree my wife planted ever fruited. Every question landed exactly where it should. This wasn't a man who'd lost his mind. This was a man being silenced. Someone stood just outside the frame, watching. Evan noticed my hesitation. His fingers tapped twice against his chest. A signal. Something we used when he was a kid and couldn't talk freely. "I'm here. I know what's happening." The call ended abruptly. The screen went black. I sat there staring at my reflection, hands shaking not from fear anymore, but from certainty. If you were watching your child speak like that, if you knew they were being held back by lies and paperwork, what would you do next? Because in that moment, I understood something irreversible. This fight was no longer about evidence. It was about time, and time was running out. When the warning became personal, I couldn't stop thinking about Caleb. Not the accident report, not the official story. Him, a man with a family, a man who only did one thing wrong. He decided not to look away. Mark came by that afternoon, unannounced again. "They closed his case fast," he said, standing by the window. "No toxicology. No reconstruction." I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. "He wasn't meant to be punished," Mark added. "He was meant to be an example." That night, I replayed Evan's video call in my head. The signal, the way his eyes never left mine. Caleb had seen those same eyes through a door. And for that, he was gone. My phone buzzed. Another message. Different number. "You're not as protected as you think." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked through my house slowly, touching the walls, the door frames, the photographs. I realized something then. They weren't just watching me. They were measuring me. How far I'd go. How much pressure it would take to make me stop. I stopped being afraid that night. Fear is useful when you think you can still retreat. But once you understand there is no safe way back, something else takes its place. Clarity. And with clarity comes a dangerous kind of calm. Because now I knew exactly what this would cost. And I was still willing to pay it. where lies wore suits and spoke calmly. The courthouse didn't look like a place where lives were destroyed. It looked clean, orderly, reassuring. Polished floors, neutral walls, flags standing perfectly still. Marissa arrived 10 minutes early. Navy blazer, pearl earrings, hair pulled back just enough to say responsible, not cold. She looked like someone you'd trust with a child. She didn't look at me. Her attorneys did enough of that for her. When the hearing began, they spoke first. They didn't call me a liar. They didn't need to. They called me confused, grief-stricken, a well-meaning father struggling to accept reality. They cited missed appointments, a doctor's note about elevated stress, my insistence that my son was being held against medical advice. Each sentence landed softly, and each one cut. When my turn came, I stood slowly. I felt every year of my age in that moment. I spoke about my son, about the photo, about the video call. Marissa's lawyer smiled politely. "Mr. Carter," he said, "is it possible your grief is causing you to misinterpret what you're seeing?" That was the trap. Not, "Are you wrong?" but "Are you broken?" I glanced at Marissa then. For the first time, she met my eyes. And in them, I didn't see fear. I saw confidence, because she believed the system was already on her side. When the evidence spoke louder than I ever could, my attorney didn't stand up right away. He waited, long enough for the room to settle into the assumption that Marissa's version had won. Then he clicked a button. The screen behind us came to life. Security footage. My kitchen. The timestamp glowed in the corner. A quiet murmur rolled through the courtroom as Marissa appeared on screen, unlocking my back door. Not knocking, not hesitating. Entering. The video played without commentary. Her moving through my late wife's study, opening drawers, photographing documents. The judge leaned forward. Another clip followed. Different day, same pattern. By the third video, the room had gone silent. Marissa's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this footage lacks context." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down," she said calmly. My attorney spoke then, his voice steady. "These recordings span 14 months, he said, each taken while Mr. Carter was not present, each showing Miss Carter searching for financial documents unrelated to her husband's medical care." Marissa finally looked rattled, not angry, cornered. The judge turned to her. "Miss Carter," she asked, "can you explain why you were repeatedly entering your father-in-law's home without his knowledge to photograph private records?" Marissa opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time since this began, the story she'd controlled was no longer hers to tell. And before we went any further, stay with me. This part matters, because the next step would decide whether truth merely existed, or whether it would finally be allowed to walk into the room. When my son finally walked into the light, the courtroom doors opened without ceremony. No announcement, no warning. They wheeled Evan in, a chair he didn't need but one they'd insisted on using, like a final attempt to sell the lie. He looked thinner than on the screen, paler, but when his eyes found mine, something fierce flickered there. Awareness. The judge didn't rush. She turned to the court-appointed psychiatrist standing nearby. "Doctor," she said, "you've completed your evaluation." "Yes, Your Honor." He spoke calmly, without drama. "Mr. Carter is fully lucid. He understands his circumstances, communicates clearly, and shows no signs of the impairment described in prior records." A breath moved through the room. Not relief. Shock. "He does not require a guardian," the doctor continued. "In my professional opinion, his continued confinement has no medical justification." Marissa's attorney stood. "Objection." "Overruled," the judge said. Then she looked at my son. "Mr. Carter," she asked gently, "do you understand why you're here today?" Evan's voice was rough, like it hadn't been used enough, but it was steady. "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand the guardianship placed upon you?" "Yes," he said. "And I understand it was never meant to protect me." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, because for the first time, the court wasn't listening to reports or opinions. It was listening to the man they had tried to erase, and he was very much alive. The truth she never planned to say out loud. Evan didn't look at his wife when he began. He looked at the judge. 3 years ago, he said, Marissa and I argued about money. Not shouted, not emotional, just the truth, spoken carefully like each word mattered now. "My mother left me a trust," he continued. "It had restrictions, long-term protection. I wasn't allowed to drain it for risky investments." Marissa shifted in her seat. Evan went on. "She wanted access to it immediately. said it was our future. When I refused, she got angry. He paused. We were at the top of the stairs. No one moved. She pushed me. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. I don't remember the fall, Evan said. I remember waking up confused. And by the time I was clear enough to understand what had happened, she already had guardianship. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. She told doctors I was delusional, he said, that I was violent, that I couldn't be trusted to speak for myself. He finally turned toward Marissa then. I tried to tell people, he said, but every call was monitored, every visit supervised, every objection written off as symptoms. His voice cracked for the first time. I wasn't sick, he said. I was inconvenient. Marissa's attorney stood, shaking his head. This is unreliable testimony. But the judge raised her hand. Sit down. Then my attorney played the recording. Marissa's voice filled the room. Sharp, unguarded, spoken during a moment she thought was private. You should have stayed confused, the recording said. When he fell, I saw an opportunity. Control everything. Protect my children's inheritance from his weakness. The courtroom didn't react at first. Shock has weight. It presses people into stillness. When the recording ended, the judge didn't hesitate. Miss Carter, she said, voice steady, this court is terminating the guardianship effective immediately. She turned to Evan. You are free to speak for yourself. Then she looked back at Marissa. And this court is ordering a full criminal investigation. Marissa's face went pale. Not angry. Not defiant. Empty. If this part of the story made your blood boil, if it made you think of someone who trusts the wrong person right now, share it with them. Because silence is the only thing this kind of cruelty ever counts on. What comes after the truth? Evan came home 3 days later. No wheelchair. No escort. Just my son standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to cross it yet. The house looked different with him inside. Smaller somehow. Warmer. The kids ran to him at first, then stopped short, unsure. They knew his face. They didn't know his voice. Healing doesn't rush. It approaches slowly, asking permission. That night, we sat around the kitchen table, the same one where this nightmare had begun, and ate in near silence. Not awkward, just careful, like we were all afraid to move too fast and break something fragile. Over the weeks that followed, life returned in pieces. Morning coffee on the porch, the sound of laughter drifting down the hallway again. The kids relearning how to be loud without fear. Evan worked with a therapist. I did too. So did the children. Because even when the truth wins, it leaves marks. Marissa was sentenced months later. Fraud. Exploitation. Assault. The facility shut down quietly. No headlines. No speeches. Just locked doors and files boxed away. That bothered me more than I expected. So much damage. And so little noise when it ended. One evening, Evan and I sat outside watching the sun drop behind the trees. I used to think the worst part was being trapped, he said. But it wasn't. I waited. It was realizing how easy it was for everyone to believe the wrong story, he finished. How polite lies sound more convincing than uncomfortable truths. That stayed with me, because if I'm honest, I helped that lie live. I repeated it, defended it, let it make me comfortable, and I paid for that comfort with years of my son's life. If you're still watching right now, I want to say something plainly. Stories like this don't start with villains. They start with silence, with moments when something feels off, and we tell ourselves not to be dramatic, with trusting the wrong, calm voice over the uneasy one inside us. If there's one thing this experience carved into me, it's this. Love sometimes means asking questions that make everyone uncomfortable. It means being willing to look paranoid, difficult, even cruel, because the alternative is letting someone else write the story for you. If this story made you think of someone, a parent, a child, a spouse, even yourself, then it did its job. I'd really like to know something. Where are you watching from right now? City, state, country, and more importantly, what part of this story stayed with you the longest? Not the courtroom, not the sentence, the quiet parts, the moments you recognized. Leave that in the comments. This channel exists for stories like this, not because they're dramatic, but because they're real, and because someone out there always needs to hear them before it's too late. If you want to hear more stories about families tested by betrayal, silence, and the long road back to truth, take a look at the next video waiting for you. It's another story where everything looked normal, until one small detail refused to stay quiet. Thank you for staying with me until the end. And if you decide to stay with this channel a little longer, I promise you this. We don't tell stories to scare you. We tell them so you won't have to learn the hard way, alone. I'll see you in the next one.